Session for March 22nd, 2022 of the Pinehurst Village Council. Thank you all for being with us. We'll go to agenda item number 2, which is a discussion of a flag and lamppost banner policy. We discussed this at our last meeting. Jeff, do you wish to comment on this? We have Jeff Batten come up and do that.
I think I'll just let
Yeah,
Jeff Batten continue that discussion.
thank you.
And I'm going to ask Kelly to join us because Kelly is the author. So at the last meeting, we talked a little bit about, whether to establish a policy related to banners on our lamppost and what types of commemorative flags we may or may not want to allow on village flagpoles. We had a request about a commemorative flag being flown on one of our flagpoles, and that was where the genesis of the discussion was that, if we're going to allow stuff like that, we really ought to have a policy that governs so that we apply
Jeff, could you
that.
speak up just a little bit or bring it a little closer? Thank you.
If we're going to allow any kind of commemorative flags to be, put on our flagpoles, we probably should have a policy about that, and that would stipulate what would or wouldn't be permissible. And so at council's direction, after the last work session, Kelly went back and did a lot of the work on this and drafted a policy. And so I'm going to actually let her talk through the policy since she's the author, and I'll be in support role.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, so we took the suggestions from the council, and the conversation last time was that we did want to stick with the U.S. flag as being primary, of course. Secondary flag would be North Carolina state flag. We had conversation, Jeff and I, about a couple of the areas that we may want to apply an exception. One of those areas was the fire department. They do have typically a thin blue line flag that they fly, and so they keep it up. And then during the month of May, they have a memorial month for lost officers. So they do fly a specific flag for that, a police memorial flag. So we have an exception added to that place. You'll note that was highlighted in yellow. The other place that we looked at was the fire station, who as well in the month of October, they have Fire Safety Week, which they typically fly a fire prevention week, and they also have a thin line red flag that they will fly on occasions. And so we have suggested that in lieu of the state flag on occasions, where appropriate, that the state flag be replaced. In the second position would be that thin line red flag or the thin line blue flag, only in front of their prospective buildings. The third exception that we noted was, and we discussed this a little bit last time, was the War Memorial at Cannon Park. Federal flags are the U.S. Flag, and the military flag is the POW MIA flag. And we have asked that council look at providing an exception that at Cannon Park only the first and secondary flags would be those, the U.S. flag, and primary and secondary, the POW MIA, flying at all times. The last part of the policy that we looked at and we discussed was for our flag post and banners. Council's recommendation was that we utilize lamppost banners only if only if the village is the primary sponsoring or a co-sponsor of an event, such as Olmsted. So the lamppost banner then will state that that will be the focus if we are sponsors or co-sponsors, and then the cost to put the flags up would go with the organization that is hosting and taking down. So all expenses would go to them. So that is the gist of the policy, straightforward with what most everyone else does, and it gives guidelines on when to fly the flag at half-mast and appropriately where to place it within the building and insides and outsides with those few exceptions. So at this time, we're asking council if they have any other recommendations on how they feel about those exceptions.
I thought this policy memo hit about every nail on the head that we talked about 2 weeks ago, so thank you both for putting that together. I think there may be some thoughts among the council members who will do that, but I thought it was well prepared. Kelly and Jeff, thank you for that. Council does have any questions or suggestions, additions to this? Jane, do you?
Yeah, I just, a matter of syntax, in both the fire station police one, it looks as though it says in lieu of the state flag twice. In lieu of the state flag, the thin blue line flag may be displayed in lieu of the state flag. That's all. All I had.
Well, and by in lieu of there, you're meaning instead of, right?
During those particular times, when they have that week of
Yeah.
memorial, if there's a loss that they are shared, then the state flag. And the consensus behind that was, Jeff states, there's not enough room to fly 3, because typically flag standards would allow you to do United States flag,
Yeah.
North Carolina state flag, then below that would be a county. So it works its way down in hierarchy, but we do not have the capacity to fly 3.
Right, right.
Right, well, but this is, what this actually says is, in lieu of the state flag, the thin red line, and in lieu of the state flag, the thin blue line, all the time. And at other times of the year, they would replace those thin line flags with an alternate flag. Was that the intent?
That's correct, but not at the thin line blue flag or the state flag, either or could be flown. So the state flag, you know, the default would be the U.S. flag first, obviously, the highest point, then the state flag. But in these specific options here with fire station, police station, it would give them the opportunity to fly in lieu of the state flag, their thin red line or thin blue line. And then there's the 2 other months where you've got, National Fire Prevention Week and then the Police Memorial Month.
But you were asking something different, was that?
No, that is what I was asking.
Okay, okay. I just had one question about the, how often do we get, aside from the thin red flag and blue flag, the commemorative events flag request on the lamppost? Does that happen much at all, or is it?
U.S. Open is the last time I recall
No, it's-
us having that, in
It's a big
2014.
event. We're talking about a significant event.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And then they've gone up, obviously, in the last 2 years with the 125th and now the Olmsted flags, but those were at our initiation.
Any other, Jeff, were you about to comment further? Jeff Sanborn? Any other comments from council? Lydia?
I have a question. It's, I'm going to use this opportunity to ask a question for the benefit of the public. At one point, the fire station was a drop-off point for U.S. flags that needed to be discarded, so it still is. So if any resident has a U.S. flag that's in disrepair and needs to be disposed of properly, they can still take them to the fire department?
That was the case, and I'm not sure that, I'm not positive if it is still the case. The Boy Scouts would pick those up and properly burn them as part of their badge earning. I'm not 100% sure one way or the other on
Okay.
that, Lydia,
Okay.
as of today. But that was certainly the case in past, and as far as I know, is still the case. But
Well, if
we'd
it's
have to
sti-
just double check that and make sure.
If it still is the case, that might be something to put on social media and a newsletter or something, because I know at the time, there were residents who thought that was a great place to be able to take flags that were no longer, shouldn't be flown anymore.
Any other questions? Now, this is the development of a policy, so it's not requiring a decision by the village council. You're looking for our consensus to proceed with this policy, or you want to bring it back to us at another meeting and have it officially passed?
I think what we would traditionally do is come back in a regular meeting and have
Okay.
you adopt a resolution
Okay,
that would adopt the
with the
policy.
policy attached. Fine.
Will we be doing it soon? I was just thinking about Memorial Day coming up.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, it'll be,
Soon, the next meeting. If
I think
we get a
we'll
little syntax
see that at
change.
our next meeting, Pat, I'd be pretty sure, yeah. All right. Consensus of council is to proceed with the policy as it's stated here tonight?
Yes, here.
Yes?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Kelly and
Thank you,
Jeff
Kelly.
Batten. That'll move us to agenda item number 3, which is discussion of short-term rental proposed regulations.
Pull this up.
And I believe in this case, you're going to have Darren make this presentation?
Oh, no, Doug's coming up here with me. This is a shared pain. Oh, go into this file. Open the file.
While Darren's getting prepared, I'll just make a couple of comments or observations. First of all, the material you're
pull
about
this
to
up.
receive has been worked on for the last week or two, or
I will go to that,
some months in some cases.
but go back.
And we appreciate the work of the staff on this. The council has not seen this until tonight, so it's new to us. And we'll be talking through this and asking questions as we go along.
I can't use that.
And this is not obviously a decision tonight. These are guidelines on this policy, and we'll try to sort through the questions that staff has for us and ask others and keep working on this project. So Darren and Doug?
All right, the reason you haven't, can you turn me down a little bit, please?
I wish life was so easy. Just turn Darren down.
The reason you haven't seen it yet is we've been, until this afternoon, we were still working and refining some of the concepts.
Yes.
That we're about to discuss this evening. And really what it is we took some of those policy objectives that we had talked about broadly a few meetings ago, and we've actually, Lori, turn me up now. Can you hear me? Lori, turn me up a little bit more.
I think she is.
Can you hear me now?
Can the room hear Darren's comment, Darren's voice?
Can you hear me now?
Lori, you want to turn it up a little more? Or you can use the other microphone, which you may not want to do. I know
No,
you
that
have your
never
special
works.
mic there tonight, Darren.
That doesn't work for me either.
Okay?
You want to go back? Now we can hear me, right? Okay, good. All right, so what we're working on is we were working on several policy objectives because before we go to the point of actually drafting ordinance language, which ordinance language is, it takes us a while to develop an ordinance language. And what we didn't want to do is start preparing ordinances. And there are models out there. Mr. Hines had stated there are numerous models around the state. It's really, we can bespoke one to our particular situation. But before we go that route, we need to be all on the same page with what direction we are going in. So that will tell us how that ordinance will look. And as a staff, so we went back to the drawing table, started to look at each of those policy objectives. We put a number of objectives in there, a number of potential regulatory responses. Then staff looked at them, Jeff, I, and Doug. We said, okay, this would be the recommended response. That doesn't mean it has to be a response that you want to potentially adopt or the route you want to go. There are other options that we've laid out in the rest of the document that we're going to go over tonight. So we're starting tonight broadly with some of the recommendations that we as staff were recommending to move forward with, and then we'll go into the rest of the document. We'll go not objective by objective to show you what we had discussed as potential options. And the way we broke this down are two different ways. We've done it as PDO amendments, ways to regulate through the PDO, ways to regulate through the municipal code, and ways to potentially regulate or ways to develop policy or educational frameworks. And if you see somewhat of what other communities do, they use marketing tools and things like that to try and get the word out. And I'm going to share with you a model that we've been looking at. So from a regulatory standpoint, regulatory approaches concerning STRs. Number one, when our number, and you want to, Jeff, do you want to start with this? Do you want to start with these, or do you want me to go down to, okay. Number one was zoning district locations. And we'll talk about this later on when we get to number one. Permit in all zoning districts where residential dwelling units are permitted. When we went into this for the objectives, I think some of our marching orders or that we were told that we weren't going to regulate or prohibit in all zoning districts. So from our standpoint, we came up with a regulation. We're trying to regulate STRs within each of those zoning districts but our recommendation is to permit them in all the districts. The issue with that, with regulating them in certain districts, is there's going to then be a loser district. So you have to decide what is the loser district, what is the loser residential district that gets the short-term rentals. So that's kind of what we were talking about there. Define STRs as whole house. And this is, when we talk about regulating an STR and why we are with respect to regulation and why all these other communities are adopting short-term rental regulations is they hadn't had them defined very well. In order to regulate, we define. So we're proposing that we do a PDO amendment to define a whole house STR, which would require a minimum 24-hour stay, and they're more than 24 hours and less than 30 days. The residents, and we're also proposing that the residents could be used for up to 14 days per year as a short-term rental use without being required to possess the STR permit. And that gets into, we heard some of the concerns about the US Open, things like that. So we were trying to accommodate give you essentially 14 days to use it as a STR without actually having the STR license. Number 3, and this is kind of, I think this one's a little bit more innovative, but I think it gets at some of the concerns that residences may have in a neighborhood with potentially larger STRs, and that's to require a permit to operate a STR, but then also require STRs of a certain size, and we're saying 8 or more, that they're required to obtain a special use permit, meaning they would have to come to the village, they'd have to get a special use permit, they'd have to go through the public hearing, we'd have to have standards, criteria, that kind of stuff, and that's the process to get a larger STR. What we like about the special use permit process is we like the fact that you can actually revoke a special use permit. You have to go through the same process. You have to go through a public hearing process, but if we note, we'll put down, with a special use permit, you can have conditions. If you don't meet the conditions, we can bring that back for a public hearing to actually revoke that permit.
Is that 8 or more for a night, or is that 8 or more for a year? What is that?
No, it'd be if the occupancy load of the dwelling unit is 8 or more than 8, we would require you to get, and that's at any one time, that we would require you to, or we're recommending that you go the special use permit route.
The maximum occupancy.
Yes, maximum occupancy.
It would be 8 or more, or some other threshold.
Yeah,
that you
it doesn't have to be 8. 8 was just a number that I've seen before, but 8.
I see what you're saying.
Occupancy limits, maximum 2 persons per bedroom. 5, parking requirement of 1 space for each bedroom. Site maximum number of vehicles per approved spaces. Here's one that we've heard before, and it's not just both STRs, but it's regular, it's owner occupied as well. Control location of parking off of driveways, and in particular some of those areas within the front yard. If it's, sometimes you've seen them, you've seen the vehicles right between, in the setback area a lot of times, between where the front facade of the house is, not even in front of the garage, the front facade. So we'd be looking at, potentially establishing regulation with respect to that.
Darren, can we control that in just regular people who live in their homes?
If we have a regulation, we can.
We can tell people, because you remember last year I had somebody from the Lake District.
Yes.
in touch, and so we can control people not parking their cars.
You would have to have a regulation specifying where they can park and where, or what an approved parking surface is, things like that. But you can have regulations.
For any full-time resident in the village of Pinehurst.
You can do that, yes. You have to want to do it, but yes, you can do that. It's not uncommon. It was more common, like we had it, I came from a college community, and kids always wanted to park on lawns, so we had a regulation.
And this is one of those regulations that we would recommend, that if we adopt this framework, it would apply to all residential properties out there, not just short-term rentals.
Well, and that's been my concern all along, is that if we want, what's our high-quality neighborhoods? Is that high-quality development appearance? What is it? What's our standard language in everything, in our comp plan, in our resident survey? We want
BSC.
high-quality neighborhoods, right? Right. So we want regulations that apply across the board that give us high-quality neighborhoods.
Yeah, some of the most ongoing problems that we have with parking are not related more so to, or long-term, I'll say, are not so much to the STR, but some of the long-term rental properties. Those are the ones that we're doing some of the abatement on, are some of them, we're actually going to be doing an abatement on one of those relatively soon. We have another complaint about a property over on Airport Road, so, and those are long-term rentals.
That one's an owner.
That, oh yeah, that's an owner occupied. The other one's a rental property.
Well, and I think about the gentleman who spoke earlier, and you've got, all of a sudden, all your teenagers come home to live, and you've got 8 cars, and where are they going to park them? They park, I mean,
Yeah, you have to wrestle with that. Yes, you're correct.
okay.
Let's see, prohibit overnight parking in village right-of-way in all residential areas. Enforcement of fines. In that prohibit overnight parking, that's another one of those rules that applies across the board to everyone. 8, enforcement of fines. Create a tiered and violation systems that escalates per property for violations within a rolling calendar year. Pursue collections of violations, including a policy when to elevate collections of fines to civil actions. So that's another one that would apply to all property owners.
And another angle on this is, if you recall, when we updated our noise ordinance a little over a year ago now, we carved out or spelled out a provision under which we could seek enforcement action against not only the occupants, but also the property owner. And I think that's a level of improvement that we need to make for all of our nuisance ordinances so that they can be applied in that same way here.
And what the other thing, yeah, we really don't have in our regular code is that tiered system for if we come out there once for trash, you get 1 fine. If you come out there twice for trash in a rolling year, you get an increased fine. 3 times you get a higher fine. So hopefully, especially with some of the STRs, that they then become managed a little bit better in that respect.
According to what Jeff said, the challenge is this occupant versus the owner issue. It's like the rental car. I mean, the owner, okay, is stuck with that, and they're supposed to collect. The renter could be back in, Denver. So we just need to think that through, but that is a big distinction in how you implement a collection of fines okay.
Let's see, number 10, and this you'll see throughout the document, and when you start to see how we've laid out the objectives, there's a lot of redundant statements. There's a lot of redundant policy responses. And if there's a lot of redundancy, I think you start to see where we're having some recommendation, and you start to see some overlap why we recommended some of these things. So the Good Neighbor Guide, that's a guide that we'd send out to neighbors, including the number of guests and cars allowed on the owner's contact information, require information to be posted in the unit for guests, including a maximum number of guests, parking info, waste pickup days and receptacle info, prohibited activities, emergency contact info, etc. Kelly, can you pull? I might be able to get to it. Hold on, I think I can get to it. There we go. I got it. So this is an example that we thought might be a good, if we go down this route. This would be something that we could require as part of the registration process. So it's called the Good Neighbor Handout, and it just starts with, I want to let you know I've been approved by the city of Littleton to utilize my home for short-term rental. And then it talks, talking about being a good neighbor, it talks about property owner name, phone number, email, primary emergency contact, secondary emergency contact. This is all stuff we would have to hash out yet, what would be appropriate for us. And then it gets into things like this, good neighbor guest guidelines, welcome to the neighborhood, minimize noise and music, just kind of good neighbor things that hopefully that the guests would observe. So this is something that we think would be a potential good source for us on kind of the educational. We'd look at being required to be sent out to the neighbors, but we think this is something that wouldn't be bad. You see, they have a distribution list, all that kind of stuff. So we think that's a pretty good possibility or a good model. And then number 11 is adopt an unruly gathering party house ordinance. We found one that looked kind of promising in Los Angeles. They have one, and I did find another one in Stonecrest, Georgia, that also looked good. We would define that as a land use in the PDO, and frankly, prohibit it in all areas to start off with.
there's another one that kind of fits into this category of maybe education or policy that might help as well. And that is, assuming there's some sort of a permit process, requiring the short-term rental property owner to post that permit prominently inside the home, where the guests, when they come in, they know, hey, this is permitted for 6. Oh, wait, I have,
Like
I have
the
8
elevator
here. I
certificate.
got a problem here, right? So, and then also make that information available to the public. So we have it might even be a GIS product that's maintained by the Village of Pinehurst, where all the permitted short-term rentals are on a map product, and you can click on that, this residence, this the address, and you can pull up the permit. And so now all the neighbors know exactly what's allowed in that home and what's not. Better dissemination of information helps us all be part of the solution.
So now we're done with the recommended ones.
Before you go on, Darren, there's an invisible elephant in the room here that I think you need to talk about. And that is what happens when you change a zoning regulation and the result is you have nonconformities.
They become nonconformities until you do something that would change the status of that site, like increasing floor area, or something that increases the intensity of that site by a certain percentage, the nonconformity can't exist.
Jeff, can you ask your question again or differently?
Yeah, so let me maybe summarize the result here. I think.
And we
if I
talked
understand
about this.
correctly, to the extent that we deal with this challenge through changes to our zoning ordinance, we have 300 or so short-term rental properties out there in the village right now
68,
that
right?
will be grandfathered in as nonconformities. And the new limitations that we create, we cannot enforce upon them unless they do something that changes their status.
Correct.
We understand that. If we were to put in place I'll use your word, permitting process, the 368 STRs right now, none of them would need to acquire a permit?
We'd make them acquire a permit, so we'd have something, so we'd have that use established, but to require to impose all the requirements that we would potentially require for other STRs, we have to look at how we can actually legally require something like that, because they're already in operation.
I understand. Why wouldn't, if we're going to adopt a policy for the village, why wouldn't we just have a grace period for those 368 so that they need to be in compliance within a year or something, rather than
If we can do that.
guillotine?
I mean, I look at these and I appreciate all the work you're doing, and I appreciate hearing from everybody out here this week, the week before, and I look at this and I go, is this legal in the current environment? We don't know what the environment is going to look like based on the Wilmington case when it comes out. We don't know what the environment is going to look like when the Senate Rules Committee does whatever they do, because they've got a bill before them that was passed overwhelmingly by the House. So I look at all, and then I wonder about the current legality of this, the potential legality or illegality of this, and you've just brought up another question, the grandfathering and having one set of rules that apply to some and not to others. And I can tell you, I even look at, and I am so sympathetic to the people here who are having to live with short-term rentals and are making their lives miserable. But, I looked at prohibited activities, and how do you define a prohibited activity? And we've got to keep going down this path. I've just got concerns about how we make this work in our community. And we've talked about, and even Brenda said it tonight, we had talked for a while, several times, about bringing in the stakeholders. And Brenda said tonight something like, we've got to hear from the entire public. And I see us going down a path here, and I'm not sure we've heard completely from the public. So I've got a little discomfort about that.
But in answer to the last part of your question, though, Lydia, I think the idea here is we need to get this framework together and to a certain point. And at that point, we definitely, in my opinion, too, want to be talking to all the stakeholders in a small group setting, something like that, where we can talk across the table and iron out any difficulties. But from my point of view, and legalities and Wilmington case, we need to proceed. We need to work on this project. We have a lot of input that the staff has provided. We have numerous input provided to the staff by others and to the council, and we need to continue on this track to develop an appropriate policy for the Village of Pinehurst. So this is the general outline that we're now getting some feedback on, and I think your intention further tonight is to go over how some of these pieces would be enacted. Is that correct, Aaron?
Well, some more, yes, to provide some other additional options for alternative to what we have laid out here versus the recommended one.
I don't think we should take our foot off the gas pedal at all on this issue, regardless of what the legislature might do, what some courts might do. They'll do their thing. We've had lots of citizen input. We had a citizen tonight send us a whole ordinance the other day. The citizens are out there working on this. Both sides. We've heard it from folks who have reservations or they want us to be careful. We've heard from citizens who say you can't do a darn thing, and we've heard from citizens who say you ought to ban all these. So there's been no shortage of input. I think what you've put together is a good framework from which we can work towards something. Obviously, we need to drill down a little on these issues about a possible grace period or something, because I think if 368 people are grandfathered in for life, that's not going to pass the smell test with the public. And so we've got to do something within the legal framework.
On that point, we have to operate within the law.
Absolutely.
It's akin to, let's say we changed the zoning map, right? And a particular parcel had a retail use on it but that parcel is now zoned for residential. We're required to allow that retail use to continue until the owner stops using it for retail.
Correct. And we do it every time we do a major update to the zoning code. There's a lot of nonconformities that are created, but they don't have to come into compliance until.
That sort of brings you back to the arguments of some people that says under our current ordinances and municipal code, these STRs are not valid where they are.
Completely different argument to try to make.
I understand that, and I'm not adopting that argument. I'm just saying that we need to find the sweet spot on this process, and I think we should. I think this is really good progress. So I
mean, and you're going to see some of the options that you've just talked about. There'll be options that we get into. I think as early as objective 1 here.
The idea of legality, I think, is important to consider, and that's what I took from Lydia's comment there, is we have to keep that in mind. Now, one of the things that's not going to be grandfathered in, let's say that we make a ordinance about parking, and where you're going to park, and that should apply to everybody. So even though I park in my front yard every day, a joke, if you make a rule in there that says I can't, that means tomorrow I can't do that, even though I've been doing it for the past year.
The difference is that would be a municipal code change rather than a zoning change.
And so I think we need to look at these also as to what is a global municipal code that can control a lot of this, that everybody should live under, okay? And that will help us doing that. And we're going to have some of these that are not necessarily a global municipal code, and that may be a different area that has to pass more of a legal review.
You know, also, Pat, you said, let's not take our foot off the gas. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that the Senate rules is sitting on a bill that would take all control away from us. And I think it's important for us that they know that we are in one of the fastest growing STR communities in the state, and we've got to have some control over what happens here. And with our state senator on the Rules Committee, I think it's especially important that, and he's up for reelection, it's especially important that they hear from us that we be able to control this monster that's growing in our community.
That's a good point, Lydia, and I think, as we've discussed before, that kind of interaction with our state delegation, especially Senator McGinnis, is important on this. And my understanding is that the bill in the Senate is not going anywhere right now and probably won't for some time. But nevertheless, it's important to get our position noted, and I will work to that end.
I don't
We already
know.
have information about it.
Senate hasn't, they're not back in session. They've got all the bills that came over from the House, and they're going to act on them or not. And if that one's sitting there, I don't know what the likelihood is that it's going to be voted on this year. But I'm not even sure the members of the Senate Rules Committee understand that this has become a growing problem in our community. And if they don't know that,
Yeah.
we don't,
Well, that-
we want.
We can certainly supply that position to them, and I think we will. On the issue of where the bill stands, though, and then I want to get Darren to continue, the bill has come over from the House, and it's in the Rules Committee of the Senate. All bills that come from the House to be considered by the Senate go to the Rules Committee. And if the Senate votes that it wants to study that particular bill or to research it, then the Rules Committee assigns it to a specific other committee. So we'll know when that process is happening, if it happens at all, way before any kind of a vote is taken, especially when it comes out of the Rules Committee for further consideration. That's my understanding, and I did discuss that with the League of Municipalities over the last couple of weeks. But clearly, we need to be working with our elected officials to have them know our position, and we will do that. We collectively, the village council. Jane, did you have a point on this? And I'd like Darren to continue.
I have a couple of questions. Starting back on number one, I, for one, feel that it would be preferable, this is in my opinion, to prohibit STRs in all single-family residential neighborhoods. I don't think there's an expectation in a single-family neighborhood that you're going to have a transient lodging business going on there. And I don't think it fits with the character of a single-family residential neighborhood. I don't think the situation is the same with multifamily and condos, where you do get more turnover. And so that would be a place where I guess they could be permitted under a permit system with regulations. But was there, and also I just want to also thank you for putting all this together, because it's a big job of work. But okay, so now we're looking at possibly allowing short-term rentals in according to this, single-family residential neighborhoods. And what we keep hearing from many of the members of the public who've come in is that they don't want their neighborhoods. It's bad enough to have one spot on the street that's a problem, but they really don't want to, I think the term that was used tonight was cannibalize the residential neighborhoods and turn them all into money machines of rental properties. Is it possible to put a cap on the number of short-term rentals?
I'm ready to talk about that. We got to get a
Well,
little bit further down.
So,
That's
A little
one
further
question.
down in my,
Okay, that's one
spiel
question I
here.
had.
all right, so we got that question on the table. You're going to address it as we go through. All right, what's the
Well,
other- what's the other
So the
question?
next one is, in number 2, 14 days, apparently any property can be rented out for 14 days without a permit. And I understand that for situations like the US Open or something, that's sort of acknowledged to be what we do around here. Okay. But if you just say any home can have 14 days, or any building can have 14 days. As a freebie, how do you know how many 14 days they've taken? So what if instead we said, these are the days that residents that doesn't have a permit can operate, can rent out? It would probably be easier to enforce, to administer. Just a thought. On number 3, permits for all, are these going to apply to existing? I'm not entirely sure that it's not possible to require pre-existing short-term rental uses to comply with the new standards over a grace period. And I think we should just make sure that we can't do that, because I think certain other towns have done that.
If they have, I'm not aware.
And
I'd appreciate
and
knowing
in
where that is.
talking, this is now back in 2020, talking to various professors at the School of Government, it was suggested, well, you know, maybe you aren't going to allow for grandfathering status when you write these ordinances. Maybe you won't allow that. Maybe you'll amortize them. And that as long as you amortize them over a reasonable period of time, it's okay. So this is what I've heard too, and I'm not an expert, but I think we should check it out. Special permit use if it's over a certain number. Good concept. Would we be better off requiring a conditional rezone, or a condition, in other words, something with a legislative standard rather than something with a quasi-judicial standard? Just a question. Okay.
Okay. I'm going to cover some of that stuff that you were just.
Maybe a special overlay.
That, we have that as well. I'll get to it.
Proceed, Derek.
Remember,
Proceed.
oop, I've come undone. All right, so let's get to number 1. Number 1 was traditional neighborhoods retain their character and remain predominantly occupied by long-term residents. What we talked about, that was kind of the goal going into it. So when we started looking at it, we looked at the PDO amendments. The first one we said zoning district locations. Determine whether or not to limit which zoning districts where an STR can be located. I laid a host of every single zoning district that allows single family, that allows some type of residential unit to be within it. So I just laid all those out. Then we went down to 1, permit, which is our, and you'll see throughout this document where we had a recommended measure from before, recommended action. Permit in all zoning districts where residential dwelling units are permitted. Again, that's just our recommendation. That doesn't have to be your recommendation. Your recommendation is your consensus. Permit in all zoning districts via special use permit. The reason why we like the special use permit is those special use permits can be revoked. That's why we like them. Prohibit establishment of new STRs in single-family districts. See, it's an option. We put it out as an option for you to consider. It's out there for you to decide which direction you want to go. We felt that we had to put some of these out there so you can talk about whether you want to explore that option. Make as non-conforming use in single-family districts. If we create legislation to regulate them, then yeah, there's a question, the whole non-conforming question. And I think that we still have to suss through some of those things. And then lastly, the one that you talked about is if we pass some regulations, we could potentially amortize existing STRs away in single-family zone districts. You can do that under our general statute, under the grant of power. You can amortize uses away. That's a decision you have to make. I mean, you can do it. I'm just.
How would that practically work? Draw a practical example.
You would pick a date that so if you pass, say we pass something as of January 1st, 2023, we say there's no more STRs are allowed in the districts. They have to go away in 5 years. In 5 years, you can't be using that at the end of 5 years, after 5 years, you can't use it for an STR any longer.
Okay, all right, I meant the 500 feet apart issue.
That's number 2.
Jumping ahead.
Oh, okay, never mind. I'm
You're
sorry.
you're
Well,
learning
I'll
from
wait
your
for-
counterpart over here.
That's the one I was,
We're on 1,
all right.
A, B, A through
The
E.
same strategy for the change in zoning that regulates short-term rentals in order to bring pre-existing short-term rentals into compliance with the new zoning requirements. Can you use that same?
I wrote that down as a note. Could you give them 5 years to come up to compliance, or do you be amortized away? I made a note. It's a legal question. I have to talk about that with our attorneys. I'm not sure. I would assume. Well, I'm not going to assume anything.
Got to go back and review them.
I'm not going to assume anything.
Okay.
All right. Now, any other questions on the first 5?
Yeah, just one thing, the 8 persons thing has gotten me confused. What if I'm renting out an STR and I got 4 golfers coming in a weekend?
That's good.
That's fine, I'm not.
That's fine. Once your capacity limit is at 8, or you establish your capacity limit at above 8, we won't allow you to do that under that without going through the special use permit and getting the special use permit granted. So it's additional control on houses that have more potential occupants on a more regular basis.
I wish I knew the data as to the makeup of the houses, of how many are bringing in 4. We got a house across the street from us. It's fine. Usually if it's 4 people that are on the back porch when they rent it, I don't notice 6 or 8,
But what you've heard, and I heard it tonight, you've heard some people are advertising that they sleep 21.
Yeah,
It'd be those types, and that's how we would how we could potentially enforce, is we'd be looking at those that are advertising in excess of what's allowed without a special use permit.
I think you need a lower threshold, but we'll go back to that.
That's an example. That's simply an example. Anything else on?
Just be mindful of the fact that every one of those will generate a quasi-judicial
I understand.
procedure.
I understand.
And
Wait, say that again, Jeff. Every one of those will,
the lower you set that threshold requiring a special use permit,
okay, got it.
the more you're going to be involved in quasi-judicial decision-making.
So right now it'd be,
It's a very timely or time-consuming process.
Resource consuming.
But every short-term rental would have to have a permit.
Yes.
And the permit would say, this building gets to have 6 occupants or 4 occupants or
Correct.
whatever it is.
depending on the number of
Based on the
bedrooms
number of bedrooms that are
or parking
Oh.
spaces
Tax records.
available.
I'm okay then.
the tax record.
I'm fine. I didn't think they were going to be, I didn't catch that part.
Oh, we're getting to
Quite
that.
there yet.
I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Are permits allowed in North Carolina?
Or what?
Permits,
Permits are allowed.
permit for short-term rentals.
Permit for zoning. It's a zoning permit. It's not a registration. It's not a license. It's a permit. It's not an annual permit. It's a one-time permit.
Because that's what we believe we can legally do.
Should clearing that up.
Number 2, the other approach, we can limit it in zoning districts, we could prohibit it in zoning districts, we could amortize them away, limit concentrations of STRs in single-family zone districts. So that would be, you'd establish a separation requirement between STRs in single-family zone districts. And we just put out 500 feet. It could be 500, 250, it could be 1,500 feet. That was to try and, the goal there was try and limit the concentration of units in one place by dispersing them out through the neighborhoods.
Wasn't that one of the issues in the Wilmington case?
Wilmington case had a number of issues. I think the lottery was an issue. I'm not sure.
The distance apart, I thought was, but I can't remember.
It's not uncommon for some types of uses, like CBRFs. I think in the state, there's a minimum requirement for a separation between a CBRF. I'm not sure if there's what other ones are out there, but it's not an uncommon concept. You see the concept, separation distance between a place that serves liquor and a place of a religious use. So it's not an uncommon concept. Doug, were you going to?
I was just going to add, 500 feet might be appropriate for an area with larger single-family homes, but if you were in a condo area,
Yeah,
it
that's
might not make sense.
Okay, that's what I was,
And that's why you could do it by zoning district. You could do it, you could create if we go down to B, same concept applies. Cap the total amount of STRs through a creation of a zoning overlay district. So what you would do is you'd create various zoning overlay districts, and we'd set a hard cap on either percentage or number on how many could be in that particular district.
I'm not a big fan of caps. I think caps distort the market, but, and I think they will, I'm sure they'll be legally challenged, but it's just, it seems so arbitrary. Well, why would the cap be at 20 and not 25?
And we'd have to have some, I mean, we'd have to develop some rationale for that.
Yeah.
But it would kind of spread it out throughout. We're trying not to concentrate, so that was why that too. That's why I don't see a number of recommendeds under that.
I hear you.
In that area. Lastly, in order to start regulating from our standpoint, you have to define the STR to provide for a regulation of land use. Define STRs as whole house, and we went over this as a recommended. The 14-day, kind of the 14-day grace period, minimum 24-hour stay, less than 30 days. And you can see the length of stay, less than 30 days. Less than 30 days, that is the standard kind of definition of what an STR is. Not all of them have minimum stays. Some of them have minimum 3-day stays, 2-day stays, 24-hour stay. We just picked the 24-hour stay.
Can I go back to the cap situation? I'm not sure I understand, Pat, what you don't like about caps. I mean, maybe the cap mechanism is clumsy, but it seems to me that a short-term rental does not add to a residential neighborhood to the quality of life. And I can't see allowing the proliferation of these such that there's going to be a tipping point,
Who decides the cap? I mean, what I like about permitting or licensing, and we have to, okay, you don't like that word. Permit. Well, I'll stick with permit. You don't like certificate? Okay, we'll stick with permit.
Permit.
And we'll get to it, I assume, later, is that there's a price on things. So there's a fine, there's a price for the permit, there's a penalty if you're not conforming. We can do various things to encourage good behavior. The cap, it's just artificial. And what if we want to change the cap? What if somebody?
We'll change it.
But I'm just saying, there's not sort of a consistent rules of the road.
Oh, let's try this. Oh, go ahead, Jane.
The rule of the road, it seems to me, is that a residential neighborhood is for permanent residents and not for businesses.
But we're deciding that we're going to, in the best sense of the word, regulate the number of STRs that are in the community.
But we're not regulating the number with this.
No, we're not.
We're regulating the
But we're
behavior.
we are.
with no limit
We're
on the
attempting to
number.
make sure that they are
And I
good
find that
neighbors
problematical.
and that there is some, our costs are covered in administrating this. And I think that will produce more serious property owners and property managers if they have some guidelines and some costs that are associated with them operating. But I just think if one year a council says, well, we're going to have a cap at 25 in whatever area, okay, Village Acres, and somebody else comes along, well, let's raise that cap to 50. And the cap becomes the issue, not the behavior of the STR.
Well, when we're ready for prime time, and let's say we decide to use a cap, and we put a recommended cap in there, and the public comes back, and we, whatever we do, we're going to hear from the public on it. And if the public likes a different number, and, I mean, you said, like, what's their basis, or like, how do you set a cap, or how do you set a cap? But we put a number out there, and we hear from the public, and back and forth, and then based on all that public comment, then if we decide a cap's appropriate, the public would help guide us to that right number.
What if we
there.
pick a neighborhood and we put a cap, and the cap will be everybody that has an STR in there right now? And what happens to the person around the corner who lives in that neighborhood and says, I got to convert this into an STR because I sort of can't afford it. I got to move somewhere else to take care of a parent or something. And we say, oh, no, you're not. You would exceed the cap. I don't think that's fair. If we're going to allow STRs,
That's a good point.
I'm not.
But aren't these things we're going to have to work through? I mean, this is our first time of seeing this.
Right.
So there's a lot still to work through.
I can be convinced, I doubt it, but I just feel pretty strongly about caps.
You see that there's several different roads that we can go, and that's why we wanted to lay out the different options. And in order for us to focus on an option, there has to be some consensus, and there has to be some consensus for us to start writing, developing regulations.
This still falls under the goal of maintaining a nice neighborhood. I'd like to see the rest of these. We can argue about the economics of a cap, and I certainly understand that. I understand the back and forth with it. I don't think we're going to resolve that now, but I'd like to see the rest we have here, if that's okay.
All right.
And if we think we've heard from the public to this point, when we start putting more concrete things out there, we're going to hear from the public.
Well, and we're
What
putting,
expect?
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
Exactly.
But and that will might help guide some
We'll
of the
have more
discussion. But we
specific-
need to,
Right now, it's just been, I feel like it's a tug of war, but you start putting specific things on the table, and we're going to get more specific comments.
get in there. Yeah.
but yeah, right now it's like this, and we're trying to figure out how to narrow it. Number 2, short-term rental uses do not adversely impact property values in our neighborhoods. Municipal code, and for previous 2, we really couldn't think of any municipal code or policy educational amendments that would do the traditional neighborhoods retain their character and remain predominantly occupied. But we felt the PDO was the best route to try and achieve that policy objective. We couldn't think of any municipal code. Short-term rental uses do not adversely impact property values in our neighborhoods. Municipal code. Prohibit overnight parking in the right-of-way. Now, we've heard this as a common concern related especially to STRs. And what we were saying is potentially, and this affects everybody, blanket prohibition in all zoning districts.
We're, that is the recommendation. There's a potential downside to this that we need to be aware of, and that is the signage requirement that would result from that.
The signs
Right
requirement?
answer, it might be that we can treat it like we do our speed limit signs and say, and post at every entrance to every neighborhood, the speed limit in this neighborhood is.
Yeah.
Maybe we can do it that way for
Yeah.
parking as well, say no overnight
Right.
parking on, within the right of way in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
Type of thing. Or it might be that we have to actually put no parking signs all over the place to.
I would hope we wouldn't
Gotta
because of
investigate that.
it's a better way.
Do
Yeah.
we,
Okay.
do we allow overnight parking in the right-of-way now?
No.
Okay. Then, well, so when people,
Regulation on it is what you mean.
we don't regulate it at all?
No.
Got it, okay. So now we want to prohibit, okay.
And there was a couple other options that we added: prohibit parking by an area, by a neighborhood. And then you could do it, prohibit parking by street, on a street basis, if you think you're having problems with a certain use. So those are all the options out there. I mean, I'm sure there's others, but those are the 3 that we thought would help to shorten up some of that congestion or relieve some of that congestion. Number 2, again, you're going to see this as a common theme: enforcement, fines recommended, create a tiered and violator violation systems that escalates per property for violations within the rolling calendar year. Again, the more times we go out there, we should start elevating, and we have to issue fines. The fine should be increasing.
So if someone parks in a right-of-way, and they're doing it overnight, and they get ticketed for it, typically you think of that as ticketing the driver or the owner of the car. And then whether that person's around again later on in the year, we don't know that. But effectively, you've also got a house there. So are we talking about also saying, hey, in front of your house, somebody parked, and we can identify that as someone who's been a short-term rental, that now we're going to fine the owner?
No, that, if they're in the right of way, the violation goes to the goes to the car owner.
And that's the answer I expected. One of the things, this goes back to something that Pat mentioned before, as we start looking at different enforcements on the short-term rentals, I think it is reasonable to see if we can look at how we can hold the property owner accountable to stuff that's on there. And that's what was brought up before. That's one of the problems, that the property owner is not being held accountable to the stuff. Not sure exactly how it's worked, but I'll just throw that out there. Okay.
Well, we also need the regulatory enforcement mechanism to allow us to hold the property owner to their feet to the fire. By doing that, generally what happens is we're going to go after the property owner, because that's the person who we have the record on. They're the owner, and they are ultimately responsible for what goes on in the property. So we'll be finding the property owner.
But we're talking about
And
parking.
that's consistent, earlier with your comment earlier, that the point of bringing the property owner into this is consistent with other aspects of things we're doing in the village. And I think that's a really, really important policy to
In
maintain.
this case, it's going to be problematic, though, because it's not as if you're ticketing for parking on the property. You're
Yeah.
ticketing for parking on village property.
Yeah.
And it would be very difficult for us to prove the linkage between a
Yes.
vehicle and a property owner.
Exactly.
That's why it always goes through.
And you ticket the car and it's a rental car, and so what? And you still haven't slapped the wrist of the short-term rental owner. If the car was even associated, it might not be associated with the house.
No, because you're not going to do that investigation to find out.
You can't.
Carry on.
PDO amendments, we talked a little bit about this. Permit STRs through special use permit in single-family zone districts. Determine which districts to permit by right or through SUP or through special use permit. You could separate that out. Create the revocation process. The other thing that we had said as well is just have a trigger point of occupancy. Eight or more persons, whatever is the number you might think is appropriate. For consistency, we kept 8 in there. Establish standards for STRs. Parking, number of spaces and location of the required parking. What we're recommending is 1 parking space per bedroom. Then we have occupancy limits. We've come up with various ways that you could look at occupancy limits in these units. The easiest one there's two relatively easy ones. There's by bedroom, how many bedrooms are in there, and we'd say potentially 2 bedrooms or 2 persons per bedroom. You could do it by unit, so you could just do a blanket 8 persons per unit, that's it. 6 persons per unit, that's it. So that is, or you could do a combination thereof. You could do it by square footage. So you could say, something, an example, 1 person per 500 square feet of heated square footage. By location within an overlay district, Old Town, maybe 8 persons, Lake, maybe 6. And again, these are just numbers that we're throwing out just to show that there are different things that we can look at and consider moving forward. The top one is probably the easiest and most consistent, X amount per bedroom. And then we could also do it through special use permit. We'd have to take into account, you'd be doing an evaluation, a special evaluation of that house to a set of standards that we have yet to develop. Safety standards, recommended smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, proper exits and other safety requirements, something like guardrails, handrails. You hear some of these stories of a guardrail not being around a deck that's elevated 5 feet off the ground. Well, that could be a potential problem. Posted floor plan with exits in each bedroom. So kind of like the concept of a hotel. When you get in a hotel, you look on that door and you know which way to get out. You're supposed to know which way to get out of that in case of emergency. Owner manager contact information. We don't have any of that because we don't have a permit process in place. Again, post permit and regulations in the unit. All of that via that good neighbor guide. Enforcement of fines, talked about that. Good neighbor guide. And here's another one that's first showing up. And this is used, and this is actually, like the people from Granicus actually, I think, offer this service. So you could actually create a subscription service hotline where a nuisance could be reported by a neighbor to that service. And that service would then contact the STR representative directly. That's just, when we met with Granicus, I think they offer that service. Several others might offer that. It's a subscription service. Costs money. Pursue collections of violations. We're gonna recommend that. Create a policy when to elevate fines to civil action. When we're finding people, it has to get to a certain level for us to be able to recover some of our costs of the fines. So we're looking at that and trying to reevaluate how we're doing that right now. Any questions on number 2? Good. Short-term rental properties are not used as party houses or for large events. Or short-term rental properties do not create nuisances in the neighborhood by being used frequently for events or parties. And I think what we had focused on this one was creating that unruly gathering party house ordinance, adopt the ordinance, look at what Los Angeles did, what Stonecrest had done, also add it to the PDO. You create it as a land use in the PDO and you prohibit it everywhere. So identify and develop standards, define it as a land use and prohibit it in all districts. And then do the good neighbor guide again, and if something gets out of hand, again, the subscription service might be able to help because they have a direct line to the people 24 hours a day. Any questions on that one? No. Good. Minimize the impact of short-term rentals on the quality of life of long-term residents in the village's neighborhoods. PDO amendments, again, as we're going through this, I think you see a theme. You're seeing a lot of the same actions that we're recommending or part of each that hit various objectives. Update parking regulations to require parking to be provided per bedroom. That's a natural parking space. Update parking space location requirements. Again, the concern about turning the whole front yard into a parking lot. That's hitting at that. Prohibit parking in the front yard unless on approved parking spaces. Establish occupancy limits by unit. Limit STR concentrations through minimum separation requirements. Define the land use. Amortize away the land use. And only permit through SUP. So again, you've seen most of these before. B, adopt Unruly Gathering House. Good neighbor guide again, and subscription service. So you see that a lot of these are hitting some of the same things that we've talked about before. This is another good one. I think this gets at that density requirement. Some of the issues with people concentrating in the unit that aren't sized appropriately. Short-term rental units should not have occupancy numbers that exceed what is appropriate for the size of the house and parking spaces included on the property. So PDO amendments limit occupancy, one or any combination, by bedroom, 2 persons per bedroom. And generally, that's 2 adult persons per bedroom. By unit, maximum 8 persons per unit, 10 persons per unit, 6 persons per unit, however we want to look at it. By square footage, by location, in an overlay district, or through special use permit. We weren't really able to identify any municipal code improvements that we would need to do the whole occupancy number thing. We thought the PDO amendments would hit it depending on which route you want to go. Good neighbor guide again, require posting in the unit.
Darren, can I interrupt just for a second?
No, you're not interrupting.
This is, maybe I'm the only one that's frustrated with this. This is a really big deal for us. And we're seeing this for the first time. And, I trust you guys. I trust staff so much. But this is a big deal. We're seeing it for the first time. I don't even know how to ask intelligent questions about things I'm seeing for the first time. And my concern is that because I'm not asking great questions right now, it might be viewed that I'm consenting to this. Yep. And I just don't know. And is anybody facing this frustration besides me?
No, I understand your point, and I think we're here receiving this report. Obviously have not seen it until this evening, as you pointed out. We're asking some questions as we go along, I'm not seeking any direction or decisions whatsoever tonight. So I don't think we should be concerned that maybe some of it, doesn't all fit in our minds just yet. So this is a first attempt to get a framework, in my opinion, and to begin to work forward, though, on some of the recommendations we're seeing here after further discussion. And we'll all have a lot of discussion on this point.
Okay, well, and typically when I hear staff recommendation, I can go along with the staff recommendation. But this is so complicated and so controversial that I need more time. I don't know what you expect from us tonight.
Nothing. You're right. Literally, we're just able to finish this up. So this is the first time anybody's seeing it. I mean, you've heard of some of these concepts before, but all we want to do is, this is kind of getting an initial reaction,
Right.
getting some comments out, and we're not asking for a recommendation tonight. We're just not.
I mean,
We're not.
I don't think
We expect any guidance that you're comfortable giving us.
Yeah, well, that's true.
I think the process has moved pretty well.
Yeah.
We went a couple of months ago, we had a problem that was growing. And it was just 6 weeks ago, someone first ran the number 368 out, okay, about the number of short-term rentals in the village, all right? That number has ricocheted around this village, all right? So
It should.
okay, it should have, because the village didn't feel the council was addressing this short-term rental over the last several years. Okay, so we identified a problem. We've heard from a lot of residents. We've heard from them through email, in person. Every meeting, there's a group of citizens that come here and say something. We asked the staff a month or so ago to come up with some policy recommendation. They came up with I forget what the number was, 11, maybe 11's in my
11.
mind.
It was
Okay.
11.
We had citizens went off and drafted up some ordinance to work from. And now you've come back with those recommendations and you've put some meat on the bone. So we have a little more understanding of what are the obstacles, what are the things we need to sort of opine on as council members. And so, I mean, I see the process sort of working. It's going to take us a little more time to get to a document that I think we can support. But I'll after I digest this a little over time,
Yes.
I'll have some comments. But I think we should proceed. I mean,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I'm happy with the progress right now.
I'm not
From
saying
where we
should-
were.
I wanted to know what the expectation was tonight, because I see recommended. Does that mean like everything else is going to fall off because these are recommended? And I definitely need more time to think through these and the what-ifs, and yes, we have to do something. Again, I'm concerned about the legality of it based on this climate that we're in the state. But I just, I think that says we're on page 4 of 6. On mine, we're on page like 6 of 12. So I just want to make sure that council has plenty of time to digest this, and that, and then at some point that we hear from the public, and I know we will completely on what it is that we're recommending.
And,
I just want that
Carry on,
clarification.
Derek.
Will the public be able to see this?
Yeah,
This
yeah,
Okay.
I think we restitched it into Novus.
it's in Novus now.
We were having some issues. I would give a recent example. Look how much time we took on the buffer development ordinance to get well, and I understand, but look how much time it took.
Bad example.
Well, no, I'm
No,
saying,
you're right. That's a great example.
and we did,
Yeah,
we
okay.
went through a lot of options on that.
Yeah.
So, so that's where I think, that's where I'm hoping that we're going with this.
All right, so with all this understood, keep
Keep
feeding
going.
us-
So let me
keep
rapidly go.
feeding
All
us
right.
here, and we're getting a framework in mind. Go ahead.
Overnight right-of-way parking for short-term rental properties does not significantly congest residential streets. PDO amendment, so that we're going to hit this, we can hit this from several angles. PDO, parking, provide adequate parking based on bedrooms. One parking space per bedroom. We think that's a good recommendation. You could also have a maximum amount of vehicles on that site per the approved parking spaces. So if they're bringing more vehicles on there than are approved parking spaces, that's a potential way to regulate. And prohibit, again, this is a concern that we have, prohibit parking in the front yard unless on approved parking spaces. So we still have to determine where those approved spaces are, but we're saying that, we're going to try and narrow that area down. Municipal code improvements, And the reason why we want to do the PDO amendment is we want to make sure that they have enough parking on site, so they don't have to park out into the right-of-way. But here's the kicker. We don't want them to have to produce so much parking that it takes up too much surface area on that site. So we've got to find that balance and where they can be. Municipal code improvements, prohibit overnight parking in the right-of-way, recommended blanket prohibition in all zoning districts at this time. Policy educational, create the good neighbor guide, post the parking regulations in the unit, potentially install regulation signage in the neighborhood. Questions there? No?
Nope.
Short-term rental properties are not, we're rolling now. Short-term properties are not modified in ways that make them difficult. This is we sat and discussed this one several times. Other than the parking, I'm not sure, we haven't been able to identify anything, but short-term rental properties are not modified in ways that make them difficult to transition back for use as traditional owner-occupied residential properties.
Some of this it should remind us not to impose regulatory requirements that cause changes to properties that would result in them not being easily transferred back into, like construct a parking lot for all these vehicles.
Well, or not adding sort of an addition that becomes a dormitory.
But don't we take care of that one by limiting the number of occupants of a?
No. It's a different issue. Doug?
Yeah, I mean, that would be limited by the number of spaces. So, yeah, parking spaces.
Point is, there was a point in time in this discussion several months ago where we were bantering around ideas about how to approach this parking problem, and one of the things that was thrown out was let's require them to construct on-site parking for all these vehicles. Well, no, we don't really want to do that. So,
Right.
yeah.
I'm developing my list, trying to get through the
Difficulties.
thing
Some
here.
of how we accomplish number 7 is by just being careful not to put requirements in place that
Right.
are harmful.
You could adjust the parking to be no more than one car per bedroom. But if you don't have the room because your driveway's too small, then you don't have the room. Don't make them construct a parking lot or a bigger driveway.
Yeah.
Okay? So we can do the verbiage on there and go to the common sense stuff.
And alternately, we might be better off, for example, in allowing them to park off the driveway, but not in the front yard, than requiring them to construct more impervious surface parking to accommodate the vehicles associated with the bedroom load on the house. It's a balancing act.
Can we do that with a maximum impervious surface limit?
We certainly can, but, I mean, why do we want to incentivize or require them to push up against their max impervious surface limit?
Well, if the maximum impervious surface limit, which would include the house footprint as well,
Yeah,
okay,
it does. Yeah.
then that's, if you've got a big house, that's going to leave less available impervious surface for parking and drives.
You might also have a very large lot. You might also have a very large lot, which is where most of our big houses are.
Well,
Yeah.
but I also think we might want to look at the dormitory aspect. Additions that,
Yeah, additions to the house that are not consistent with its long-term use as a single-family resident.
right,
But that,
That would be very
we do that
difficult to-
through another process,
There's,
don't we?
there's different ways to achieve that, I
Not
think.
with this.
Yeah, I mean,
If someone's going to try to put a
if a
dormitory
lot's
on their
big
house,
enough
they're
for an
gonna come
8-bedroom
through.
house, then,
Yeah.
you know, we have some of those, right? But they were built for single-family residences, right?
Right.
So Derek, go ahead.
And this may be a question that comes out at the very end, but the title is enforcement. That's what I scribbled down, which is the big challenge is, how do you make the machinery, how does it work after we come up with some plans and processes? And how do we keep it simple enforceable and transparent, so that both the property owner and the property manager understand the consequences of their actions or the actions of their tenants. So I don't know if you're going to address that, or we can address it later, or whatever.
Well, we just need to be very specific. We can't have a lot of gray areas that, when we have a gray area, it's very hard for us to enforce the code because, especially in the state where if it's ambiguous, the ambiguous goes to the tie goes around, it goes to the property owner. So we have to be very specific. The reason why we have some issues enforcing some of our regulatory provisions is they're gray. They're more purpose-oriented. They're not actually specific. They say things that when we look at it and we try and enforce something, there's no number to enforce. There's not a setback to enforce. We can't do it. So even with everything that we do here, we have to be very clear when we're passing, when we're designing an ordinance, that we can actually, A, explain it, B, when we write up somebody for a violation, that they know clearly where they're violating the code. So I think, yeah, we do need to be very clear on a lot of these things. We're not there yet because we haven't started drafting anything, but yes, we have to be very clear. Because enforcement, it's where the rubber meets the road on all this stuff, is being able to enforce the code that's out there. And
Carry on. You're on
compel
7,
compliance.
going to 8?
We are, yes. So 8, minimize public nuisance behaviors such as noise and trash that are often associated with short-term rentals without creating additional work for police and code enforcement staff. We didn't really see a lot that needed to be changed from a PDO perspective. We did talk about municipal code enforcement of the fines, create a tiered and multi-violator process that escalates per property for violations in a calendar year. Create that good neighbor guide, at least, something would be posted on the site that go to some of the neighbors for contact. The subscription service hotline, where nuisances can be reported. We didn't really see, we have an existing noise ordinance in place. We have an existing trash rules in place. It's a matter of us being able to get out there and actually enforce. Now, as you know, the most common complaint that we respond to is trash cans when they're out, so that's the most frequent one we get. So trash and debris in the site, we can cite you for that. It doesn't clean it up right away, but we can cite you for things like that. Noise, it's always a tough one to enforce. Somebody has to be hearing it. So it's a way of, how do we better enforce that or police that rule? I don't have an answer with what's going on with this proposal at this point. Policy, again, good neighbor guide. So we talked about that in subscription service. Help to ensure the health and safety of occupants of short-term rental units. What we thought was limit the overall unit capacity. Municipal code require minimum safety requirements and an inspection prior to the permitting process. So you come in with a before we issue the permit, we'd go out there and look at it. You got fire and carbon monoxide detectors, hand and guard rails as required, and other safety code improvements. We'd still have to look into what we can actually require, because most of these, what we're going into is a house that's been permitted as under a single family occupancy code, under a residential code, I should say. Printed and posted floor plans and home fire escape plans from each floor indicating 2 means of egress. Again, enforcement of fines.
Darren, keep your voice up a little bit. Thank you.
Enforcement of fines, policy educational, good neighbor guide recommended, create guide, Littleton. There. Any questions on the health and safety end of things? Good. All right. To the 10, to the extent possible, and this is where, the regulation there's going to be regulations that apply to all, and then there's going to be that apply specifically to the short-term rental situation. So what we're identifying here is some of those rules that apply really, that we're creating specifically for short-term rentals. And that is PDO defining it as an STR land use, regulating the location of the STR in various districts, potentially limiting the concentration or minimum separation, limiting concentration through minimum separation requirements, or I would say caps as well, establish occupancy limits per unit, and then also through special use permit for its location within a single-family district. So those are things that would apply exclusively, really, to that use in that neighborhood, or in the single-family neighborhoods.
So, Darren, can you explain A2 again, regulate location of SDR in various districts?
That goes back to number one, which districts should short-term rentals be allowed in? I think the recommendation that we had going in was, yes, we can allow them in all districts, but let's have all these standards in place to better control them. So whether it be an R10 district, R5 district, R30 district, R210 district, VMU, things like that.
Aren't they allowed now?
Because we don't regulate them.
That's right. So they're allowed now.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
So anything else on that, Lydia? Good? Any other questions?
But you had said earlier, you're not planning on ruling them out in certain parts of town.
I'm not ruling them out.
Well,
I'm not ruling them out.
I think what Lydia is referring to is the recommendation was
All.
to create a permitting process for
Yes,
all.
yes, correct.
okay, thank you.
That's our recommendation.
Well-
That could contract.
When did that get adopted?
It didn't. Nothing's adopted.
Well, when did that get recommended?
We just,
Easy.
Sorry?
This week,
We're seeing it right now,
This is
time you're seeing it, yeah.
earlier on.
just here.
now you need to,
Not recommended by council.
no,
no,
none
it's this-
none
this is staff recommendation.
Nothing here is recommended by council. This is just staff. So anything where it's recommended is Jeff, I, and Doug sitting down talking about these things. So no, it's not your recommendation. That's why you were shocked.
I have
Might
a
tell us
grip
to
on
do
it.
something completely different.
I realize I don't have a grip.
All right. Good neighbor guide, subscription service hotline. And then 11, reduce tensions between short-term rental property owners and neighbors. And really what the process is some of the standards that we're proposing to create and moving forward with this process is intended to try and do that. So define the STR, regulate the locations, limit the concentration, potentially, establish occupancy limits by unit or by bedroom, regulate required parking placement, could do it through a special use permit. So all those type of things, from a PDO standpoint, that's what it's intended to do. Municipal code, adopt the party house unruly gathering ordinance. I could put that up here too, under PDO amendments. Policy, educational, that good neighbor guide, I think, could be a really good resource for the neighborhood. And then potentially that subscription service hotline where nuisances can be reported. And yay, I've got to the end.
Well, Darren, I really appreciate the fact that you have provided alternatives in here.
And there could be others.
Which is helpful. I mean, looking at it for the first time, that means there's extra to look at, but I'm glad to see the alternatives set out. I'd like to have an opportunity to go over this, take it home and work on, work through it myself, and then maybe come back and have heaven help us a special meeting to ask follow-up questions and so forth. And
Yes.
I think that should be our next work session.
Like to do that as a special work session, or?
Well,
There's a lot of information here to work through, so.
That's an option. In my mind, it depends on what else might be on the work session 2 weeks from tonight. I just soon keep it to the regular time, but we have, over the years, had a benefit from some special meetings from time to time.
well,
I'm just,
there may be a big advantage to that, in that we could also have the public listen and have the public offer some comment. Because this will have been out there for a few weeks.
right.
And
Hours.
As I'm thinking about it personally, I think it might be to our benefit to meet in our regular work session 2 weeks from now, have time to follow up on this, and that will begin to, get us through the funnel a little further. And then the idea of other public engagement, however we want to do that, special meetings, small group, whatever, that's when we can think further about that. But I think to come back at our next work session, having reflected on this information, and we can all go down and check off our favorite or preferred recommended step as this outline provides, that'll be helpful.
I
I
second
think
that.
certainly we're going to hear from the public between now and the next meeting.
We're gonna hear
And
from
we're
them,
going to hear
yes.
from the public at the next meeting during public comment based on what
Yes.
we've seen
Yes.
here, so.
Yeah, and that's fine. So we'll carry on next work session with this.
Thank you, Darren. This
Yeah.
is
Thank you.
Yeah,
a
thank
big
you
job
very
of
much.
work. Thank you.
You know, I'm reminded when we started this, we said whatever we end up with is not going to make everybody happy. So I hope that we hear from the everybody's over the next few days, weeks, months, so we can finally get something. Wasn't it you, somebody said we want to make the least number of people unhappy? Somebody had said that at some point. No, you didn't say, we want to make them all happy?
Both sides make them a little bit unhappy. They're both a little bit unhappy, you're fine.
But I want to make sure we listen.
kidding.
Darren, I'd ask this. As you have worked with information that you have researched and also some information we've been provided by other sources or the league, whatever, are there particular, is there a particular document at another location that, or two, that you feel we should kind of look at and see how it all gets framed together?
Well, it just depends. I mean, really, the reason why we haven't started doing any ordinance drafting is you can see there's all kinds of there's different roads we can take until such time as we get you focused on, what you actually want to do with what's laid out. We can share with you all kinds of ordinances that are out there. I think Brenda's done it.
Yeah, well, we've received some,
Yeah.
from different towns. So,
Yeah.
all right, so
So
no real answer to that point. That's fine. That's fine.
We just need to know, I just need to know kind of which direction you want to go. Once we know that, we can start firming things up. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's not that quick. But we can start to firm things up. But, if you want to prohibit them all, if you want to allow them in all districts, you want to amortize them all, overlay, there's a lot of permutations here which direction that ordinance could go. So I need you to be at some consensus, so we can do, and you still have a constituency out there.
Maybe at the next meeting, the special, when we go through this in 2 weeks,
Sure.
We can triage some of these things. We can figure out some of the things that we just
Yeah.
move away and then
Yeah.
narrow it down so we get to something that we can present, in essence, as a really draft that the public can pick apart.
Just one more meeting, maybe a little aggressive, I think, in focusing a little bit further, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
The point is, we're moving as quickly as we can to final decisions, and that's important. And it's,
And really, what is narrowing in? You want to narrow down some of these options.
right.
I think we adopted the pathway that, what is it, Granicus?
Yes.
The organization from the white paper on this about establishing our objectives. From there, we look at the objectives which are being presented tonight. We look at what's tenable, what's not tenable. We look at what's enforceable, not enforceable. We look at what's legal, not legal, all that kind of stuff that's going to happen. So there's a long process still in this, but I think it's important we keep our focus on the ball. The next step is making sure we all go through this and we come ready to talk about this in 2 weeks. And we can discuss the different things that we think are appropriate for obtaining those goals. And then as we move forward to that, then it's going to be the ordinance, it's going to be the legal review, things like that, and we'll see how much actually lasts through this. So, long process left.
And the other thing that is still out there too is the Wilmington case has not been.
And
The
you have the
decision
Senate
is
stuff out there, that's out, there's lots of stuff that's still working with us, but I think we just need to move forward. The other part of this that we've heard on from various folks is, well, what about those folks who are not necessarily, doing short-term rentals, but they're just living, okay? And some of those people are allowed, some of those people park in their front yard, some of those people that do things. So the more we have as municipal ordinances, the safer we are in doing things, okay? The greater chance it's going to last is what goes on. And maybe it's fair. Maybe we all should live by the same rules.
Jeff, are you saying that the more we have ordinances that are applicable across the board, rather than carving out SDRs, the better?
Correct.
Okay.
And then the reason I say
sure I
that is
heard you
because
correctly.
that we have legal basis on that, okay? And because now we're just creating a municipal ordinance versus an STR rule.
Well, and that's why continued to ask about, can we tell people where to park their cars in their yard?
Well,
Some might maintain, I can park my car anywhere I want in my yard. And that's sort of a fundamental private property rights question I have.
we're going to have so many other conversations next week on that kind of stuff, because you have the property rights issues and various opinions and things like that, and we'll have a chance to opine on
Some
that.
people think that they should be able to put a fence anywhere they want in their yard, and construct it of any material they want, and any height too, but that's not the case.
That's a great point.
All right, Darren, thank you. Doug, thank you very much.
Darren?
You're welcome.
We have one other important item to discuss. I think I think we should go straight into it if everybody's okay with that. And that has to do with developing some policies for the NAC. And Jeff's going to present that. I'm going to stand up as you start. I think everybody
Go ahead
should
and get
stand
started.
up.
Yeah. Okay, so this is really, what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is really intended to be nothing more than a conversation starter. John and I have been having some dialogue over a period of months, really, about how we can help to make the NAC a more effective body in achieving what we think is the core mission of that organization, and that is to enhance better two-way communications between us and our residents, leveraging the neighborhood framework that's out there. And as I have been thinking about that question, there are several challenges with the way, the lack of definition, I guess, that's out there right now about the NAC that I think creates opportunity for create several challenges that create opportunities for improvement. The first is there's not really a mission statement. The second is although there are perceptions that there's an established geographic framework out there, there isn't. There's no definition of what the neighborhoods are.
Well, some of the
Kind of
neighborhoods,
that,
are defined by the nature of they're having an HOA and
Yes,
it's in
that's right.
a gated community.
Some are very,
But otherwise, it's a very loose structure.
some are very, that's right. Some are, it's easy to make the assumption, but there's no policy document that lays out, these are the neighborhoods that will be represented on the NAC. And a byproduct of that is that we currently have large swaths of the village that aren't represented by anybody. Because there's no established framework, and we don't have a methodology to recruit because there's no established framework, and I mean, it's just kind of there is no framework. The third is that, with the exception of our neighborhoods that are organized on the basis of their property owners association or other previously existing structure, many of our NAC members don't really have any effective communications methods or means with the neighborhoods that they purport to represent. The fourth is that there's no established policy governing membership. That's tied to the geographic things. They're kind of related. And then the fifth thing is that, unlike all of our other advisory boards, this set of volunteers doesn't go through any onboarding process that helps to integrate them into, expectations, rules, procedures, builds relationships, starts to build relationships between them as new volunteers and our staff and the council. And I think that if we can work toward an effective policy document that addresses all those challenges, I think we're going to be better off. And so I put down some conversation starters in this document here for you. I proposed a mission statement that's centered around the
Back to the mission
yeah, there you
statement.
go. Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Can you scroll up just a little bit there? Mission statement to foster and enhance two-way communications between the village government and village residents. I suggested some goals: collaboratively build effective communications, And really, what this is we recognize the fact that our currently well-organized neighborhoods have effective communications means, and they have distribution lists and all that stuff, and it works wonderfully. But I think we need to sign up to create a framework that helps those other neighborhoods get organized and have effective build distribution lists. And then when the mantle gets, or the torch gets handed from, the previous neighborhood representative to the next neighborhood representative, there's a distribution list that can follow and maintain that continuity. Second goal, use effective neighborhood communications means that these distribution lists that we're talking about to distribute notes from presentations and discussions that take place at these monthly NAC meetings. We typically give an informational presentation at each one of the NAC meetings. And the idea is that we're sharing that information with them, and we would like them to share it with their communities or their neighborhoods. The third is to use effective communications means to collect input and feedback from their residents. So that's the two-way part of it. And this is already happening to some degree in the neighborhoods that are well connected right now. Not so much really from the other neighborhoods. And there are varying degrees of that occurring presently. And then NAC representatives analyze what that input and feedback they get from their neighborhoods and kind of synthesize that and tell us what they're hearing. What are the trends out there? So could you scroll down a little bit, Kelly? This was, me just looking at the map and looking at some previous work that we had done, this is kind of the way I potentially see the geographic framework working. There are some very large neighborhoods out there that have well-established communication means right now, and you can see them listed there. I couldn't recall whether or not Doral Woods has a property owners association. I think they do, but in any event, it's pretty.
Beverly?
Woodlands.
Yeah.
Well,
Hey, Wilt has done it before.
no, Doral Woods is Bert Higgins.
Sorry?
Bert Higgins is Doral Woods.
Yeah, Bert represents
And there is
Doral
an
Woods. I just don't recall if they have a property owners association. Yeah, so whether Doral Woods
They have
falls in
something.
this category or somewhere else,
Right, okay, I see.
they need
yeah.
to be captured, I don't recall.
Yeah.
And there are some smaller organized neighborhoods as well that probably still warrant a seat on the NAC, and many of these already do. Pinehurst Trace, Walker Station, Midland Country Club, Clarendon Gardens, Cotswold.
In Woodlands, they're sort of organized, right?
Well, no, Woodlands is not really organized, but
Well, they
They're
have,
seeking to do that. In fact, what you didn't hear yesterday at the meeting was a lot of commentary, Pat and Lydia would recall, and Jane.
Reynolds, I think.
Yes, Bev from Beverly Reynolds, who
used to be Susan Foster, now it's Beverly Reynolds.
Right,
Right, they don't have a property owners association.
that's true. They did, FYI, and this
They're
it relates to this
Working to
conversation.
build communication means.
And they ask, in fact, if members of the council would come to a block party
Block party,
that they
yeah.
have. And I indicated we would do that. So yes, there's development there that
Now,
needs happening.
One of the problems with the Woodlands is it's a very small neighborhood. And it's
Got
not,
it listed under 3 with Monticello and lawn and tennis.
right. So, the question is, what do you do about these other chunks of the village that there's no real framework for? And this is something that kind of made sense to me. Midland Road, so this is east of the traffic circle. Taylorhurst and that Kings Grant area might be one area. Old Town East, then it says Old Town East and Linden. What I intended to say was Old Town West and
Yeah.
Linden. Then,
would that be Debbie Lawler's area?
well, there's two in that And there was actually a Linden, there were 3 positions potentially in that relatively small footprint previously. So what do we do about that situation there?
It started out as Old Town East and West, the divided line being Highway 5. And then, but it never extended enough over to the traffic circle, really.
Yeah.
That should have been part of that.
Yeah.
And then, through Deborah's work, the commercial, the sort of center core, city, village core, commercial residential area.
I think she calls herself the downtown.
Right, but that could all become Old Town East. I mean, that.
Or west, or depending on where you
Correct.
draw the line, yeah, right.
Whenever you do decide on the neighborhoods,
Yeah.
it might be good to have a colored map of these things. so we
You're right,
can
yeah, that's
visualize just where we
This would have been
are.
better if I had shown you a map. I
I
agree with
understand, I'm
that.
not asking you to do it now, I'm just saying, as I'm looking at this in my mind, I'm trying to figure out
Yeah.
Woodlands, Lawn and Tennis, how do they
Yeah.
hook up? Okay.
The next step would be bringing back to you a recommended actual map that
Okay.
shows this type of a framework.
I got
Yeah.
two comments. One, I don't know if you're just doing it for us,
Yeah.
I don't think in the end we should have a smaller neighborhood and larger organized neighborhoods. I think that might not be a nice distinction to the neighborhoods.
Yeah, no, this was, yeah,
I'm-
this
I'm
is just a,
I'm just,
yeah.
it's sort of,
What,
and the
in
second.
the end, I think what you're gonna see is a map with a list of neighborhoods.
The second thing, in
Yeah.
the current group listing, I never quite figured it out, there's the Pinehurst Civic Group.
Hmm.
And, I mean, I've never seen an attendee in the few times I've been.
Yeah, she does come occasionally, and I had forgotten about
I'm not
that
saying to
addition.
include it,
Yeah.
because my point
Yeah.
is, if we have an organization that is not a neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
where do we draw the line on the
Exactly.
next
That's a very good
organization that
question.
wants to come in the door?
Right.
So I think we either open it up to all these groups, or better yet, if you're not a neighborhood,
It's
it
the
is a
neighborhood.
neighborhood advisory committee. It's
Yeah.
not an organizational advisory committee.
Right.
That's my two comments.
Yeah,
What about
for,
the-
for example, the Pinehurst Business Partners, or
Yeah, we start getting into that right
Yeah.
away, and how do you tell them
stops
no?
being about neighborhood communications with residents.
Right, right. Jane, did you have a point?
What about the ETJ?
We're not through the list here yet, but
No,
Go
the ETJ as recognized as a neighborhood, a participant.
Are they currently?
Don't we already have somebody
No.
who's a member?
well, Carolyn Jamison
There's never
has
been an
sort of
ETJ
fit that, but it's not.
representative.
Say again, Jeff.
There's never been an ETJ representative that I'm aware of, anyway.
I always looked at Carolyn Jamison to sort of be that person, but it isn't specific
Yeah.
to the ETJ, yeah.
Well, I would like to recommend that we do have a representative from the ETJ, because they're subject to our zoning and they're part of the thing, and I think they
If you
should
wrote
be at the table.
I don't, to me, the ETJ is, first off, it's not in our municipal limits, obviously. So while it's subject to our zoning, it's not subject to most of the things that go on in the village. Second, the ETJ is so large and fragmented that there's no way to organize it. It makes sense. Third, there are neighborhoods within our ETJ. Down along Highway 5.
Well, that's Carolyn.
It actually has the largest concentration of residents in the ETJ. So if you're gonna go that route, I would recommend you appoint somebody from there.
You wrote us a really good memo about this last time this came up.
All right?
You wrote us a very good memo in response to this request when it last came up, and you thoroughly covered all of the issues, and they made sense at the time. If you want to recirculate that memo.
I mean, by definition, it's not a neighborhood. And,
You're talking again about the ETJ now.
I'm talking about the ETJ as a whole, and in fact, I mean, a lot of us are working very hard to prevent it from becoming a neighborhood. So why do we want to treat it as a neighborhood?
I guess it comes back to the, one point Jay made on the zoning issues. What's the voice that the ETJ, which is governed by our zoning, has? And
Planning
the
and
only
zoning
place
board
that-
representation.
Sorry?
A member of our planning and zoning board and board of adjustment.
That's correct. Yeah, that is correct. But maybe, hypothetically, maybe there's room, or not just room, but reason for the ETJ to have some comment, to have some access to the NAC. That's just,
That's for you all to determine.
Yeah,
You've heard my
yeah.
recommendation.
but that's true. And, but it's a good point that on the Planning and Zoning Board and the Board of Adjustment, there is a representation there.
Yeah. Directly for the things that affect them.
How do you decide who from the ETJ? I mean, it's not like,
Right. That's kind of what my,
no homeowners association, and there's no, I don't have the map in front of me, but the ETJ.
they don't even live in proximity to each other. I mean, it's,
How do you pick a representative from the ETJ? We've got ETJ South, we've got ETJ West.
I'm undecided, but I just.
Jeff, can I?
But
can I-
we'll need to, especially on this category 3, we'll need to think through those, how those listed places relate to each other and how they could become a neighborhood, and you have some thoughts about that, I think on page 2 here even, Jeff.
Yeah.
You want to go on to the
yeah,
next
so
page?
could you scroll down again, Kelly?
Does this list of neighborhoods leave any areas within the municipal limits out?
Not that I'm aware of. And that would be the intent, that when we actually draw the lines on the map.
Right, make sure everybody's covered.
Every residence is captured somewhere.
Yeah, I've got some comments. I've served on NAC for at least 2 years. And I've had 2 people call me today and said, it looks like the village is trying to take control of the NAC. And based on my observations that I'm getting ready to share, I don't think so. I think this is a good step forward. To me, in the past, the neighborhoods have seemed random.
Yeah.
So I like seeing what you're doing here. I like to see it on a map. Sometimes I've wondered if NAC members are voicing just their concerns or the concerns of their neighborhoods, because there hasn't been an effective way to provide input or get input back. So it looks like we're going to improve on that. I've got, do NAC members have the ability to communicate with their neighborhoods? So it sounds like we're going to facilitate that, which is a good thing. But another thing I've noticed is it seems like some NAC members have just served forever. Not forever, but there's no limit on their term. And so I think we do need to talk about the term limits. If someone can stay on there with no end in sight to his or her term, you're taking away the opportunity for someone else to serve in that neighborhood.
And to get fresh perspective and viewpoints from different people in our community.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I've also wondered, and this is not for us to decide right now, but I've wondered if we should maybe put a time limit on the amount of time they can share their concerns. I mean, we give people 3 minutes here. Should we give them 3 minutes? But then maybe, if people go over, they might say, well, I have a little bit more. But sometimes those comments just seem to go on and on. But if we do this, and I think we should, I think that we can make a push through social media or e-news or whatever to tell people what we're doing. And we're doing this to better the community. We're doing this to get your feedback. Because I think there are a lot of people out there that don't even know this exists. So I think we can do a better job of getting the word out, what we're doing, why we're doing it. This is to serve you better. But I like it. And I don't see the negative. I don't see the boogeyman anywhere that anybody maybe thought
The
they were
question
saying.
becomes the selection process.
In terms of the representatives?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the issue. Okay, now, in some cases, going back to what you're saying about a term limit, in some cases, there may not be anybody else who wants to take on the NAC in a neighborhood. So that person just stays there. In the other cases, we have neighborhoods that are not represented, from what I can see.
right.
Right.
So, and I don't know if we have anywhere there's a dispute of 2 people who want it. I haven't heard of that yet, but,
Well, to that.
I think, so, they're all, this is where, the current neighborhoods out there fall everywhere on the spectrum.
Yeah.
Right, but I think that with regard to membership, I think, I made this comment in here, the policy should probably give some deference to our our POA organized neighborhoods.
I agree with
To let them appoint somebody, as long as that person serves
Right,
in accordance with the expectations.
right.
And I think that with regard to the definitely unorganized neighborhoods, we should probably handle it like we do our other appointed boards, where we solicit for applications, and we do an interview process, and the staff makes a recommendation to the council on people that are appropriate to represent that neighborhood, and you make the formal appointment. But there might also be some gray area in there that,
Yeah.
that we need to consider. I don't know how to address that gray area, but
Where are the gray areas? Well, and to
I think part of your idea, though, Jeff, is that not only helping neighborhoods that have no representative, no natural representative,
yeah.
helping that selection process along, but I think you also have the idea that we should be bringing into the process for all of the NAC members the linkages that other committees throughout the village have already, the volunteer onboarding, all the things of that nature that we can educate them on to make them part of the picture and create a team that we're working together as a team.
Yeah, it's all, you hear the word teamwork from me all the time, but I mean, yeah, I think there's a real opportunity to ramp up the teamwork that we have with our NAC.
which is great.
Yeah.
And to Patrick's point, I think if we do what you're saying, I think if we promote this better and show that they really do serve, they're of value to this community. But I don't think they know that, because I just don't think we've done a very good job of explaining what they do and promoting membership.
Mhm.
And I think if we do that, we could get.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah.
I've got to know.
And then
if-
even after rollout, I mean, how do we make it happen?
Uh-huh.
How do we make it happen? We're going to have some very thoughtful processes to communicate with our residents about the value in them signing up to be on these distribution lists that we're going to help to create and manage
Mhm.
for these unorganized neighborhoods, so that we can create the opportunities that we're trying to create.
Yeah. Well, that's to your point of not only selecting the people, but from those that are from unorganized neighborhoods now, being able to help them identify and have a contact procedure to help identify ways to
Yeah.
be in touch with people and using addresses and things we have access to build the network in
Yeah.
a neighborhood that's now kind of unorganized.
Yeah.
Now, some folks on the NAC already have seen this because they were looking at tonight's agenda and happened to see this. And so over the last 24 hours, I've had some comments. And I think one of the things that's a little bit in question is you use the phrase here under member expectations, sign the volunteer agreement. We have all of our volunteers to do that, of course. But acting in an extension of the village staff.
Yeah.
Now, the Neighborhood Advisory Committee was created by Mayor George Lane for the village council. So I think the NAC historically have felt a relationship to the council, certainly to the staff, because you're here making presentations and all that, but it's to the council. So there was some question about how you meant that, how they would act as extensions of the village staff.
There may have been better words to choose. I'm sorry? Cooperate with village staff and building.
Yeah, same there.
Yeah, that's us helping them create those,
That,
yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. That verbiage, extension of the village staff, comes from our Baldridge application, where we described all of our volunteers as being an extension of the staff, to include all the advisory boards, the Planning and Zoning Board, the Board of Adjustments, the HPC, and I think largely that's what we get from them. They function as advisory boards that are extensions of the team, okay? Not just the staff, but the village team, staff and council. And I think that, going back to my earlier observation, this is about enhancing teamwork.
I explained it today. I said it allows us to extend ourselves out into the village in a way that we can't if they're not there.
Yeah.
You can't have planning and zoning, you can't have Darren's department out there. You can't have all of our departments out in the community all the time.
Yeah.
So these committees are just extensions of what, and people go, oh yeah, now I get it.
Speak up, Pat, we're not hearing. You may be off. Oh.
Yeah.
But I do think that residents, since they only have 5 people they elect, see that role and that connection and the extension of the village staff, that phrase, I can see where some people would get jittery about that. Especially if they've never seen it before.
Yeah. The council is the council. Everybody else helps the council. Our employees
Oh, I
help the
like that.
council, our volunteers help the council, right? And that's what we're really getting at here. They are appointed volunteers. I'm an appointed official, right?
But they're appointed
I support the
volunteers.
council.
But
They support the council. We all are on the same team. That's what we're trying to get at here.
I think it's good.
All right, what's our next step from the council's point of view here? I haven't heard any major additions, subtractions so far. Maybe there will be some, but again, this is pretty new news, and we haven't had a chance, other than this last half an hour, to talk about this. Are there other questions of Jeff, or other additions or policy ideas that should be incorporated in this?
I just like to see.
Subject to thinking about it for a day or two?
Right. I mean, first impressions. I would like to see the map, and so we polish up that stuff.
Start to hang some
Yeah.
detail on this.
Yeah. I don't, I still feel that the phrase extensions of village staff is not what village
fine.
residents expect, so I'm
Like I said,
just.
As I said, I could have chose different
And
language
you
that
may
might
well,
be more appropriate.
and so
Yeah.
that can be worked on. One other thing I'd like to see is that members who get selected for this can opt in, okay, rather than opt out, to having their either phone number or email on our website when we list them.
Yeah.
So that if somebody's moves to the community and they go there and they look up and I'm in Cotswold, well, I don't know who Billy Bob is. Let me email Billy Bob if his name's there, or call him. Now, if somebody says, I don't want my phone number or email up there, that's fine. But I think a lot of these people, if they're bold enough to want to be an NAC member, they probably don't mind it.
To that point, I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't make a forceful statement like this about their phone number. I think a contact email should be required. Whether it's the one we help them manage to facilitate their distribution list because they're an unorganized neighborhood, or it's
I'm with you.
the property owners
I
association.
didn't think about that, but I'm fine
Yeah.
with that. Yeah. That should be a requirement, because no one can say I don't know how to contact.
Yeah.
Contact email address, maybe on the village system, of the VOPNC system, yeah,
Yeah.
for them, just
Well,
like we have.
It probably wouldn't be on the server, but
Well, however you would do that,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, yeah,
What we're thinking about is that for these unorganized neighborhoods, what we would do is we would create for them a Gmail account. So it might be Monticello@gmail, right?
That's a good idea.
Something like that. Yes, so it's tied to the neighborhood, it's not tied to a person, and then,
Right.
you know, we as staff can help the transition of that email account and the distribution list that's associated with it from one representative to the next, and it carries forward, and
Good.
that's the idea.
Jeff, I'll be happy to work with you over the next days, weeks, around the budget process to help bring this along, and anybody else has ideas and questions, put them forward to all of us by email. And probably we can maybe bring this to the next work session too, although I think that session may be dominated by the STRs, as we see. Good. Anything else on this particular item? Are there any further from you on that, Jeff? Are there any issues for future agenda items or other business to do tonight that anybody has to suggest?
I can ask
Patrick?
Jeff about this later.
Lydia? No?
I'm fine.
Jeff Morgan, you all right? Jane? Okay, that'll bring us to the end of our agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn the work session for March 22nd, 2022?
I move to adjourn the work session.
You do that well, Jane. Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Pat Pizzella. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None? Our meetings are adjourned. Thank you all.